Let's walk through the creation of the child, generate random number flow, explaining each step and the purpose behind the actions. We begin by creating a new flow inside Power Automate within your solution. The flow is set to be an instant cloud flow, meaning it will be triggered manually by another flow. Once the flow is created, it is named Child. Generate random number. This name clearly reflects the purpose of the flow, to generate a random number. The first thing you'll notice when creating the flow is that it starts with a manually trigger a flow action. This trigger will accept two parameters, minimum and maximum. These two parameters define the range from which the random number will be generated. The minimum value will set the lower boundary of the range, while the maximum will determine the upper boundary. Once the flow is created and the trigger is defined, we move on to the next part, which is the core functionality of the flow, generating a random number. To achieve this, we use the rand function, which is built into Power Automate, and generates a random number between two values. However, it is important to understand that rand excludes the upper boundary. To overcome this limitation, we adjust the maximum value by adding 1 to it. This ensures that the random number can include the maximum value. Next, you add a compose action to the flow. This action will calculate the random number based on the values passed from the trigger. The compose action is renamed to generate random number for clarity. Inside this action, the expression using rand is constructed. The formula essentially generates a random number between the minimum and maximum parameters provided by the trigger, including the maximum value. This is done by increasing the maximum value by 1 through the use of the add function. By doing so, the flow will return a random number that lies within the range, both boundaries included. After the random number is generated, it's time to pass the result back to the parent flow. To do this, a response action is added. The response action will send the output of the generate random number action to the parent flow. This allows the parent flow to access the generated random number and continue its own execution. The output of the generate random number compose action is referenced in the response action so that it can be returned to the parent flow. Once the flow is set up with these actions, it is time to publish it. After saving your work, click Publish to make the flow live and accessible for use. This ensures that all the changes you made are now publicly available and ready for execution. Testing the flow comes next. To do this, click on the Test button in the Flow Editor. You'll choose to manually trigger the flow, which means you will input values for the minimum and maximum parameters yourself. For example, you can input 1 as the minimum and 100 as the maximum. When you run the flow, it will generate a random number between those two values. It's important to note that no external connections, such as SharePoint or Dataverse, are used in this flow, so there is no need to configure any run-only user permissions or connections. Since the flow does not rely on external services, it's self-contained and functions without the need for any connection setup. The response action is a critical part of this flow. It ensures that the parent flow receives the output from the child flow. Without this action, the parent flow would not know when the child flow has completed or what the result of the random number generation was. Once you've published and tested the flow, you can be confident that it will correctly generate a random number between the minimum and maximum values provided each time it is triggered. The flow is efficient, clear, and easy to test, making it a reliable tool for any scenario that requires generating random numbers within a specified range.